Hello, everyone. Thanks to the session focused on From Theory to Reflex, how Intel-based tabletop exercises forge incident response readiness. I'm excited to be here for this session and looking forward to sharing some expertise from the front lines as a consultant conducting some of these exercises for a variety of our clients. Before we get started, just wanted to make a quick disclosure that any case studies and examples are drawn from experiences and activities working for a variety of customers and do not represent our work for any one customer or set of customers. Facts may have been changed to obscure the identity of customers and individuals associated with our customers. So with that disclosure out of the way, we'll jump in to the agenda for today's session. So we've broken this up into about 5 different sort of areas to focus on. The first one will be what is a TTX and the key pitfalls to avoid. Second, our wire thread Intel-based TTX is crucial. Third, we'll focus on leveraging frontline intels and things and learnings from the frontline that are crucial towards developing an excellent exercise. The fourth is developing and creating a safe environment to learn from. And then lastly, what are some of those core initial steps that you need to take as you get started in your journey of developing or conducting a tabletop exercise? So with that, just some quick introductions. My name is Haris Siddiqui. I am a senior strategic consultant based out of the Central Region, part of the strategic consulting practice within Mandiant. I've been part of this team for well over 4 years now, and generally in the space of security for about a decade, focusing on cyber risk management, cyber risk quantification, security program development, and most recently helping lead a variety of tabletop exercises across a variety of industry verticals and clients that we have. So I'm very excited to share, as I mentioned, some of those frontline expertise and things that we're seeing that can help ensure you conduct a successful tabletop exercise. So to focus on the first thing, what is a TTX or a tabletop exercise, right? A security exercise generally is focused on a discussion-based simulated security incident. Often these scenarios are developed based on key components of what a cybersecurity program would look like for a client, what are the most common threats that they would be facing, as well as what are some of the capabilities that the internal as well as any external parties have that can help ensure incident response is timely, incident response is effective, and well coordinated. The goal of an exercise like this is to identify core strengths as well as any potential weaknesses to help shore those things up and put emphasis and enhance any of the areas that may be weak within the organization. These are often valuable exercises that allow organizations to test their technical executive either separately or in a coordinated exercise where you go through a technical scenario and perhaps as a follow-up you go through an executive level scenario to identify what are the core technical responses that are needed as well as the things that you expect from your executive team to do in the event of a major cybersecurity incident. Now, it's important to focus on what are some of the core things and potential mistakes that folks make when conducting a tabletop exercise, right? Or what we refer to as crucial pitfalls. I'll go through at a high level over here and then have subsequent slides that'll give you some more in-depth reasoning behind each one of these things, right? So starting off with lack of clear objectives in a scope. Oftentimes having a single point of failure mentality during exercises. There's also a component of having a fear to fail, right? Or participants not being actively involved because they may feel that saying anything that goes against a documented plan could put them in trouble. Also, developing unrealistic or overly complex scenarios. And then last but not the least, getting bogged down in technical details of a scenario. So for the first one, like lack of clear objectives and scope, right? So going into an exercise without a defined purpose is like a journey without a destination, right? It's important to avoid the boil the ocean scenarios that try to test everything that's out there. Instead, focus on specific measurable goals, right? Are you testing initial detection and triage processes, whether that's internal or external, hosted by an MSP? Evaluating communication effectiveness. How effectively are you able to communicate? And then assessing the ransomware payment, decision process if the ransomware is part of your scenario, or other things to ensure that you have a fairly narrow and well-scoped scenario that ensures that you have a successful exercise. The other common pitfall that we see is allowing a specific set of individuals to dominate the discussion, right? Whether that's senior leadership or folks that could be potentially, technical engineers. It's important that we don't fall into what we often call in the industry as the kind of hero syndrome, right? Because what that will do is it'll mask your true capabilities. You want to make sure that we create an environment where if you do fail, you're able to identify those failures, you're able to identify any weaknesses. And the goal overall is to test the team's response, right? Not just individual expertise of a person. Facilitators should actively encourage participation from all attendees, and redirect conversations to ensure that a collective effort and collective responses are taken. The other key important is this idea of fearing to fail, or in some environments we'll see this gotcha culture where the focus is to defer responsibility to a different team or different individual. I think when participants feel like they're being set up to fail, they become defensive, they're less transparent, and unwilling to engage authentically. So it's important to foster a no-fault environment where you are able to identify weaknesses, and it's not seen as a failure, right? Emphasize that the goal is to break the plan, not the people, and really test out what your incident response plan and processes look like. And then creating unrealistic or overly complex scenarios, right? So while it's important to challenge your team, a scenario that's too far-fetched or often overly technical for the audience and the different types of teams that may be present in the room can result in confusion and disengagement. So the scenario should be plausible and relevant to your organization's specific that landscape. Avoid introducing too many simultaneous injects or fire drills, or even red herrings that can really confuse those that are attending the exercise and derail the primary objective of the exercise itself. And then lastly, getting bogged down in technical details. This is something we often see where the objective becomes we just have to get through the exercise rather than really focusing on understanding all aspect of a scenario, right? So the focus should be on the strategic decision making and communication processes. Oftentimes in good IRs, we see that it's not so much the detailed documented, things that you have or technical know-how. It's more how well teams are able to communicate with internal as well as external stakeholders. So that's a very, important component. And it's important to find a healthy balance between going technically deep and doing deep dives versus pulling out enough information that allows us to test out some of the core components of an incident. So next, why are threat intel based tabletop exercises crucial, right? Hopefully this is pretty straightforward, but there are some core components that are important to consider, right? So enhanced realism and relevance. Basing scenarios on TTPs of adversaries known to target a specific sector, particularly a sector relevant to your industry, is important. And one of the best ways to do that is by leveraging intel and threat intelligence that's out there, right? Whether that's internally sourced based on systems you've deployed or relying on other resources that are external. Another part is proactive gap identification. Threat intel-led exercise can reveal critical gaps in your organization's defenses that might be missed in a generic scenario. For instance, an exercise simulating a known ransomware group's multi-stage extortion tactics can highlight weaknesses in your organization's data exfiltration detection. And units that might not be explored in a standard ransomware drill, right? So it's important to customize and cater it to what's relevant to your environment. And threat intelligence often allows us to do that. It allows improved decision making at all levels. It allows us, again, to bring a level of realism and also allows us to focus on threats that are emerging and threats that are at the forefront, right? And things that we're seeing. One of the key components of using threat intelligence is it allows you to help prioritize security investment in different areas, right? Whether it's on controls from a personnel perspective or a training perspective. Using an approach that's focused on threat intel ensures that you're looking at things that are the most crucial and the most relevant based on current time. And then lastly, right, fostering a threat-informed defense culture, right? So the approach advocates, and it's advocated by institutions such as MITRE and many other such organizations out there that encourages a continuous cycle of understanding adversary behavior and using the knowledge to really refine and strengthen your defensive capabilities. The other core thing that I really wanted to highlight is incident response is never linear. Things never go in a straight line. So I think it's very important for us to design and develop an exercise that while you want the scenario to be simple, you want to include some elements that essentially simulates what a real incident would look like, right? There should be some level of confusion. There should be some level of, core discussions around things that may not have clear-cut answers, and that's okay because that is often what incident responders will tell you happens in a real-world scenario. So again, right, as I emphasized, it's important to find that good balance between the two, but know that it should never just be a very straightforward scenario that you walk through based on your incident response plan or certain playbooks, and at the end of it, you feel you've accomplished something. If you're not walking away with some key learnings, or if you're not walking away with things that potentially are follow-ups for you to enhance, then that means that there's potential to do more in how you're structuring your exercise. So next, I want to talk about leveraging frontline threat intel, give you some examples of what this could look like, right? So I've broken this up into 3 tiers of threat intel collection. The first focus is on high-level strategic intelligence, right? It's the what and why. So, think of your collection efforts sort of as a funnel, right? And these 3 tiers that are broken up allows you to really understand what are the core things you should focus on. So for high-level strategic intelligence, right, you ideally want to look at annual and quarterly reports from major cybersecurity vendors, government agencies. We often leverage this across the spectrum to help develop scenario or even help scope out, right? What is the most important thing we want to focus on? Is it an emerging threat, coming out of some geopolitical activity that's happening at the global scale? Is it something that's targeting specific, critical infrastructure within the US or globally? So it's important to use reports that are often aggregated, and I've included some helpful resources. So some reports to highlight would be the Mandiant M-Trends report that essentially aggregates a variety of incident response, in this case, hundreds and thousands over many years of IRs that we have completed. And it tells you, right, what are the most common threats we're looking at? How are those threats changing? How are dwell times changing for a threat actor sitting in your environment? And then some other honorable mentions are the Global Threat Report by CrowdStrike, Verizon DBIR, that also includes a lot of good IR data, Honeywell, Cyber Threat Report, as well as CISA advisories that often come out and can be helpful. So at that, the what and why, high level strategic intelligence, I think it's important to really feed in from some of this information. Number two focuses on industry specific and tactical intelligence, right? So this is now things that are more specific to your industry, not just broadly the most impactful incidents that are happening across the world, but things that are targeted to your industry. If you're in healthcare or if you're in manufacturing, what are those things that have happened over the past year, 2-3 year timeline to your peers where an incident may have happened? And it's important to get that intelligence, get that information through some of the resources highlighted here, right? So you have your different ISACs that are available. You have intelligence, platforms, right? Such as GTI by Google Threat Intelligence, Recorded Future, Trellix, and so forth. It's important to leverage platforms like these, also because you can often use some of the threat intel that's coming in, directly apply it to your internal environment, right? And then from there, leverage those things to develop a holistic scenario and something that can really challenge you, your team, to gain a better understanding of, what are those things we really need to focus on, right? What are those emerging threats that are coming out that are important for us to highlight? And then the last is operational and tactical intelligence, right? So this is essentially what I call the nuts and bolts, right? This is looking at those things that are relevant to your internal environment, right? So now we've gone down to that layer where it's specific, operating systems that are deployed, specific instances or cloud resources that you're leveraging, and what are some of the threats against those things, right? Those core vulnerabilities that exist. Often we leverage the MITRE ATT&CK framework, right, or the main attack framework. You have OSINT that can be leveraged, and a variety of other tools within the space, oftentimes open source, as well as things that security telemetry that you're getting from your own internal tools or your security stack. So a culmination of all three of these things really allows you to develop a holistic view and create a scenario that can be impactful and really allows you to test, things that would be significantly deterring to a cybersecurity incident within your environment. Next is, safe environments to learn, right? So this is a critical part. And I highlight this because often when I'm leading exercises or our teams are leading exercises, we also highlight this point that the objective of the exercise is not just to get from point A to point B as quickly and most efficiently as possible. Or in some cases, we'll see teams really get stuck on this scenario. It's important to be flexible, but in doing so, understand that the goal is to bring to the surface some gaps that may exist, right? It's also important to highlight strengths that exist within your broader cybersecurity program. It's important to create an environment that creates open dialogue. That is often what's needed to develop that collective muscle memory, right? Where the course or the goal is not just for teams to debate each other, but rather come up with solutions or identify things in which perhaps we don't have the clear-cut answer, and that's okay, right? The time to have that discussion is during an exercise and not when a real-world incident is taking place. And as I mentioned previously, being able to do that, being able to develop a strong exercise using frontline threat intel can really help create scenarios that will allow folks to have an open dialogue. And then last but not least is, the emphasis of the exercise should really be focusing on, honest problem solving. What happens if we get in a scenario like this, right? The focus shouldn't just be about, as I say, CYA or cover your assets, right? Where each team or member or individual is just focused on presenting the best picture that they possibly can. While that's okay, we also want to focus on identifying those things that can help us get better at it, right? So hopefully you iterate on these exercises versus iterating in a live incident response type scenario. So then what are some of the core things when it comes to getting started with conducting an exercise? How do you conduct one? What is a core starting point for anyone? So I've simplified this in 4 key phases that I think are important for any good tabletop exercise to be developed. Phase 1 is really defining your clear and core objectives, right? What are the goals that are driving the exercise? For some organizations, it's truly a matter of testing their defenses, right? So it's testing the documentation you've developed, it's testing the playbooks you've developed, it's testing your outbound communications platform. For some organizations, the focus is not so much about testing, but rather creating an educational environment in which perhaps, you may have your HR department that's joining in, or you may have an external MSP that's part of the exercise, or other teams. So understanding what those objectives are and the outcomes you're looking for right at the beginning is very important in ensuring that you develop a successful exercise, right? What are the ground rules? Who will be the ultimate audience that will get the output of this exercise? And really thinking through that can be very helpful. Phase two is the scenario development and preparation, right? So I've already mentioned making sure you're gathering adequate threat intelligence, crafting a realistic scenario, right? Develop injects that once again are relevant. It's okay, as I mentioned previously, to have certain red herrings or certain things that may be confusing because once again, incident response is not linear, right? But ensure that the scenario ultimately leads to a conclusion. And while some assumptions may be made, just for us to move forward through the scenario, you walk through all aspects of what a standard incident response would look like, and then certainly have, and prepare necessary material. One key thing I'll also mention here in the scenario development and preparation is, leveraging a variety of resources in developing an exercise that looks at, once again, right, your broader what's happening out in the wild, industry specific, and then environment specific, and really focusing on that strategy in that phase two can provide some fruitful outcomes in phase three and four. Then three is your broader logistics, right? Appointing a skilled facilitator. I can tell you that based on exercises that I've been part of, right, or led, the person facilitating can really make or break an exercise. So it's important, whether it's an internal stakeholder, if they have experience, they've ran exercises, and that's great. If not, then there's certainly opportunities to bring in an external facilitator that walks through these exercises and often walks through a variety of different client environments, right? You don't want someone that is just familiar with your environment to run a successful exercise. While that's a maturity you can eventually reach, I think it's important to bring someone that's really focusing on running these types of simulations for a variety of clients and environments. And then conducting logistics around, right? What are the core things we want to test and focus on, and then doing a walkthrough of that exercise. And then the final piece is really the execution and post exercise, activities. So you conduct a successful exercise. Let's ensure that we're scribing details during the exercise. We've seen this mistake happen where folks would go through a session and then internal teams are not really taking any notes or detailed notes. And that is very counterproductive. So let's ensure we do that. And then also focus on developing some kind of an after action reporting, especially if this is something you're hosting internally. Generally, if you're bringing an external party to conduct the exercise, then that party will provide some kind of an after action that should include high-level recommendations, as well as strengths of your broader, security program and how well you responded to an incident. So these four phases sort of are, the core focus of what needs to be done in order to get started to conduct and develop a successful tabletop exercise. And one bonus tip that I would like to include that our teams internally have been having a lot of fun with is leveraging the power of AI, right? Leveraging the power of prompting and essentially using that to pick your adventure, right? And play around with different types of prompts to conduct research and test your hypothetical scenarios. It's a great way to understand and really synthesize a vast amount of real-time global data, right? We're not saying have AI develop your exercise. What we're saying is making sure that you use it to test out different theories, to look at what's publicly available out there. It really works as a force multiplier in your ability to aggregate information that obviously the facilitator subject matter expertise will allow you to develop a holistic scenario. But it's something that we have been testing, we've been trying out, and it's really been a force multiplier for our teams and how we are not only developing scenarios, but being able to pull in the latest and greatest information from a variety of our teams, right? Whether it's on the threat intel side, advanced practices, or from an incident response perspective. So all in all, with the bonus tip, I would leave you with two specific things that I personally love, right? Two quotes that are famous. Probably not the first time you're hearing this, but I still nonetheless like repeating them, right? So the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. A very famous quote attributed to multiple generals, right? But fairly self-explanatory into why, in my opinion, it's important to test things out in a peaceful environment, right? And stress test some of those things so you're not concerned and worried about focusing on the less important things in a real incident. It's often not the technical stuff or in technical details that negatively affect an incident response. It's really the small things: who to communicate, when to communicate with, what are some of the standard processes we need to do. So it's important to focus on those things. And the last thing is, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, in the infamous words of the great boxer Mike Tyson. So while plans are great and useful and helpful, it's important for us to walk through some of those things. Some of the greatest learnings that we have tend to happen in a tabletop exercise environment. And then of course, the next area is, in a real world incident response, right? Obviously, we don't want anyone to go through an IR, but if you do, we want to make sure that you're adequately prepared. And conducting successful executive, technical tabletop exercises is a great way to test out that muscle and be prepared for a real world type scenario. So with that, I'm very thankful for you to tuning in and listening into this session. We'll conclude the session here. But if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at harissiddiqui@google.com, or you can also find me on LinkedIn if you just search Haris Siddiqui. Thank you very much.